Hello from the Channel studio in London and welcome to another edition of Foreign Dispatches, the program that takes you around the world in 25 minutes. I'm Teniola Oyitayo. On the program this week, United Nations says war-torn Sudan must not be forgotten, calls for aid funding, plus Palestinians struggle to find food with warnings of a full-fledged famine. The United Nations has urged countries not to forget the civilians caught up in the war in Sudan, appealing for $4.1 billion to meet their humanitarian needs and support those who have fled to neighboring countries. Half of Sudan's population, around 25 million people, need humanitarian assistance and protection, while more than 1.5 million people have fled to other countries.
10 months into Sudan's civil war between the RSF and the Sudanese army, the country is facing acute hunger, the world's largest child displacement crisis, and a shattered health system threatening to kill far more children than the armed conflict itself. Despite this, the United Nations aid chief says it has been extraordinarily difficult to get attention on the crisis. The UN estimates that about 18 million people are facing emergency levels of hunger, double the figure from last year.
Half of the population of Sudan needs humanitarian assistance, 25 million people, far too many of them children. 18 million people are, quote unquote, acutely food insecure. If we start seeing famine in Sudan, and it won't be the first time we've seen famine in Sudan, to add to this violence and displacement and lack of access and lack of a political horizon, then I think we can all agree we have no humanity in us that would allow this to happen.
An estimated 3.5 million children are projected to suffer from acute malnutrition this year. For about 700,000, it could be life-threatening. Around 3 million children have been internally displaced since the outbreak of fighting, in addition to 2 million displaced in previous crises, the largest number of internally displaced children globally.
More than 700,000 children are likely to suffer the most dangerous form of malnutrition this year. UNICEF won't be able to treat more than 300,000 of those without improved access and without additional support. In that case, tens of thousands would likely die. There's been a five-fold increase in verified cases of killing, sexual violence and recruitment from a year ago. That equates to a terrified number of children killed, raped or recruited. And these numbers are, of course, the tip of the iceberg.
These babies can recover very quickly. If there is a possibility to provide them with therapeutic feeding, babies in a matter of few days can go from the brink of death to be playing in these centers.
The UN Refugee Agency is appealing for $4.1 billion to meet their humanitarian needs and support those who have fled to neighbouring countries. The appeal last year to provide aid to civilians in Sudan was less than half funded.
All parties have restricted the movement of aid. So the operating context could not be more difficult. The fighting continues. You're at catastrophic levels of need. The funding nowhere near matches these. And then when we get aid with brave partners on the ground to move it, it can frustratingly and life-threateningly not move for 2 months.
Sudan now has the highest rate of internal displacement in the world, surpassing Syria's 7.2 million. A majority of families are scattered in displacement camps across the country and are forced to depend on aid and the generosity of fellow Sudanese, who have also been affected by the crisis.
I miss my mother and siblings, and I want to return to my home. Since the fighting doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon in Khartoum, I would rather leave my country permanently. There is no stability or peace. What is more important than having peace? It doesn't matter what situation you are in. You need peace and stability. That's all.
More than 1.5 million people have fled across Sudan's borders to the Central African Republic, Chad, Egypt, South Sudan and Ethiopia.
This is Kurmuk, the border between Sudan and Ethiopia. Through this border, 20,000 Sudanese refugees have crossed into Ethiopia to seek safety from the war in their country. They are part of almost 50,000 who have come to Ethiopia since April 2023, when the hostilities erupted in Sudan. Africans never shy away and are true to their reputation of being hospitable people, of being generous to the distressed. This is an appeal, this is naturally an appeal also to the international community. All these countries, including Ethiopia, are not rich countries, are not countries with a lot of resources. They need international help, they need burden sharing. And unfortunately, the Sudanese refugee crisis, displacement crisis, humanitarian crisis is one of the least funded in the world today. There are many other crises around the world. Some are acute, some make the headlines. We should not forget that for the people that I have just spoken to that have fled from war in Sudan, their headline is their suffering day in and day out, and they need help.
The conflict is estimated to have killed more than 13,000 people. Sudan's rival militias shared power after longtime ruler Omar al-Bashir was toppled in a popular uprising in 2019. Conflict erupted last April after a power struggle developed between the two military factions amid a faltering transition towards elections and civilian-led government. The fighting has continued to escalate despite international efforts to reach a ceasefire.
And over in Gaza, the possibility of a full-fledged famine looms across the entire strip amid the Israel-Hamas war, but especially in northern Gaza, where some people there say they're using bird feed in place of flour to bake bread. Aid agencies say the fighting has triggered a humanitarian catastrophe that has spread hunger, malnutrition and disease across the embattled coastal enclave. Food shortages are getting more acute in parts of Gaza as the Israel-Hamas war rages on. With no access to flour, people are resorting to animal feed to make their bread. Mohammed Khalidi runs this mill. Due to a severe shortage of wheat, he uses bird feed and other grains to make flour.
One of the most prominent obstacles is that there is no wheat to be grounded now, and we are now on the verge of famine. If no wheat aid or flour is brought in, we are on the verge of famine.
The price of fuel has been another obstacle in running the mill.
Amidst this crisis, there is another crisis. We are working with diesel. If it is available in the black market, a 20-litre tank is sold for 600 shekels, which is approximately 30 shekels per litre. The international price is less than $1. But here in Gaza, the price of 1 litre is more than $10. If diesel and flour are not brought in, the mills will stop working. There will be not an iota of flour for people to eat.
Abdul Majid Salman, a displaced person from Jabalia camp, brings whatever grains he can find to the mill for his wife to be able to bake bread.
I came to grind wheat and corn to bake because there is no flour. We are forced to do this. This is food for birds and animals, but this is the only alternative. There is no other alternative.
He says amid surging prices and no jobs, he's left struggling to put food on the table for his family.
Everything is expensive, and there are no jobs and no way for one to work to earn money. Prices are skyrocketing. We started eating one meal a day because we don't have enough to go on. Everything is so expensive.
People have also described digging down into the soil to access water pipes for drinking and washing. 4 months since the escalation of hostilities, the United Nations says the entire population of Gaza is facing crisis levels of hunger.
There are really almost unprecedented levels of acute food insecurity, hunger, and near famine-like conditions in Gaza. It's really an almost unprecedented situation that we find ourselves in. We have categories for how we measure acute food insecurity, the IPC phase classifications, and in IPC 3, 4, and 5, which takes us from emergency to crisis to catastrophe. All 2.2 million people in Gaza are in those categories. And again, we've never seen that before.
Aid agencies are also warning that as well as severe food shortages, a breakdown in health services and inadequate facilities for water, sanitation, and hygiene are putting children under the age of 5, as well as pregnant and breastfeeding women, at increased risk of malnutrition.
We visited Al Najah Hospital, a hospital that's been built and designed to house 65 patients. They have over 300 patients today, and the majority of patients are trauma patients, many of them just kids, frankly, and they are desperately trying every day to find the resources to meet the needs of this incredibly heavy load. But this degradation of the health system is really striking. And the only way forward is peace. The only way forward is a ceasefire. And we hope and pray it comes as soon as humanly possible.
There's a lot of talk about evacuation of people and a military intervention. Well, that would be a complete catastrophe. And first of all, there's no way where people can go. Though there's no room for any evacuation.
The UN Humanitarian Coordination Agency says more than half the aid missions to the north of Gaza were denied access last month, and there is increasing interference from Israeli forces in how and where aid is delivered.
Well, I am particularly worried with the deteriorating conditions and security for humanitarian aid delivery in Gaza. There is a breakdown in public order. At the same time, we have restrictions imposed by Israel that are not improved and limit humanitarian distribution. On the other hand, the deconflicting mechanisms to protect humanitarian aid delivery in relation to military operations are not effective. And so my sincere hope is that the negotiations for the release of hostages and some form of cessation of hostilities to be successful, to avoid a all-out offensive over Rafah, where the core of the humanitarian system is located, and that would have devastating consequences.
It says 300,000 people, estimated to be living in northern areas, are largely cut off from assistance and face a growing risk of famine. When Foreign Dispatches returns in just a moment, we head over to the West Bank, where curtailed economic activity with Israel has taken a toll. Thanks for staying with us on the program. Palestinians in the occupied West Bank are struggling to make ends meet because Israel has blocked funds from entering and revoked work permits for people with jobs in Israel. The lack of funds in the territory has created further economic chaos and stoked fears of more violence. For Palestinians in the West Bank, life under Israeli occupation was already difficult. Since October the 7th, however, things are only getting worse. Heightened hostilities have brought about an increase in Israeli military presence, resulting in the imposition of movement restrictions and the establishment of additional checkpoints, severely limiting the movement of the people. The increased movement restrictions mean farmers in towns can't sell their produce and buyers can't access markets, while less than 100 kilometers away, those in Gaza are starving.
We have many problems. The checkpoints. You can't walk freely. The produce can only be sold outside the town. If it stays here, it rots on the ground. It's difficult to sell because of the checkpoints, the harassment and pressure on farmers. We're throwing away the vegetables, and people in Gaza are eating tree leaves. And this is a big tragedy. The international community is just watching.
Since the onset of the recent escalation, a staggering number of workers are losing their jobs, with businesses being forced to close or downsize, and the Palestinian Authority facing a funding shortfall impacting the salaries of civil servants. Roughly a third of the territory's income has vanished over the last 4 months.
These days, with the war going on, the situation is much worse. The harassment has increased. The people who live here, they are under strict lockdown and are only allowed to leave for 2 hours a day, 2 days a week only, from 7 to 8 a.m. and from 4 to 5 p.m. After that, people can't return home. They can only move around once every 3 days.
Unemployment has risen to 29%, compared to only 13% in the preceding 3 months of the year. In the last 3 months of 2023, the gross domestic product of the state of Palestine decreased by 22%.
With the war in Gaza, shops are impacted, people are impacted because of the food prices, they don't have jobs anymore, and so even before the crisis, we already struggled with funding and the needs were high. Now the needs are even much higher. So it's really urgently required that we get more funds to help those people in need who are really suffering because of the impact of the Gaza war in the West Bank.
After the October 7th Hamas attack, which Israel says killed about 1,200 people, Israel banned some 100,000 Palestinian workers in the West Bank from crossing the border to work, citing security concerns. This has been a huge financial blow to the West Bank. Wages of cross-border workers account for $5.5 billion a year, about 1/3 of the combined economy of the West Bank and Gaza, according to the World Bank. Israeli businesses have also been hurt by the absence of Palestinian workers, but rather than restore the permit system, the government has announced that at least 65,000 workers from India and Sri Lanka will start arriving over the coming weeks to do the jobs previously held by Palestinians. And finally, on the programme, the mayor of the London Borough of Southwark recently hosted members of Nigeria's diaspora community in the UK to address the issue of out-of-school children in Nigeria. Collaborating with charity IA Foundation, the event aimed to mobilise Nigerians in the UK to support efforts in addressing the crisis, which deprives an estimated 20 million children of their fundamental right to education. The issue of out-of-school children remains a significant challenge in Nigeria. It's a crisis the mayor of the London Borough of Southwark, Michael Shitu, says requires urgent and collective action to surmount.
Education allows you as an individual to realize your full potential. No matter how challenging an environment is, and Nigeria has its challenges in itself, we need all hands on deck. You can't have all hands on deck if people do not have the opportunity to be a key member of society, to be a constituent, contributing member of society. So whether you like Nigeria at its current state, or you dream about a Nigeria which is yet to be, the solution lies in education.
Ibironke Adeagbo, CEO of the charity IA Foundation, highlights the costly repercussions of out-of-school children, drawing parallels to insecurity and poverty.
133 million people in Nigeria are living in poverty out of 200 and something million. And that's because if you don't get education, you cannot increase your standard of living. You cannot become economically active. You cannot take care of yourself and your family. So you will live in abject poverty. So if we don't want that poverty to recycle itself, we need to pick those kids up. We need to put them in the classroom. They don't belong on the streets. Because those children of those days that were roaming the streets, nobody paid attention to them. Those children have now grown up. They have no skills. They are not economically active. Therefore, the only thing they can do is to resort to crime. So no prizes for guessing why we have a high level of insecurity in Nigeria today.
Celebrating the 5-year anniversary of the NGO, Nigeria's acting High Commissioner to the UK, Ambassador Cyprian Tessa, acknowledges the progress made so far, stressing the importance of the foundation.
It is incontrovertible that education is the cornerstone of economic growth and national development of any nation. Therefore, we must acknowledge the transformative power of quality education and its pivotal role in shaping the future of our nation. The IA Foundation has been remarkable in addressing this vital issue through the provision of education to less privileged children in slums and underserved communities across Nigeria. IA Foundation, your efforts to tackle barriers to education is indeed applauded and acknowledged.
Nigerian donors in attendance urge others in the UK diaspora community to also strive to make a difference.
We in diaspora, anything, no amount of money you have or contribute is too small. It's important. We know what the exchange rate is talking about now. We know what it is. And it goes a long way in Nigeria. So, let's not say it's the government's responsibility alone. We as individuals, as organizations, we can do something as well. We can partner with government. We can do something on our own. But the end goal is to get these kids off the streets into education. It is very important.
When you consider the amount that they need back home, it's something that you can afford. A dinner out for one family one night will probably pay a school fees of someone for a term, if not a year. I don't know any other way to put it, but to say to people, think about it. think about putting a smile on somebody's face.
Over the past 5 years, the foundation has assisted over 100 children by taking them off the streets and covering their school fees and other necessities. With increased funding, they aim to reach more children.
We've picked up about 105 now. The statistics is 20.2 million. So 105 is a drop in the ocean. So as we said today at the presentation, we want to be able to pick up 1,000 children every year. And we want to work collaboratively with the government, because at the end of the day, it's the government's responsibility to educate its citizens. But government can't do it alone. So we are here to support the government to make sure we can dent that 20.2 million. It's embarrassing. It's just not acceptable.
In a bid to tackle the crisis, IA Foundation officials also plan to meet UK lawmakers in March to lobby for more international intervention. And that's the programme today, but remember, our top stories are never far away. You can catch them on channelstv.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Tenyola Uyitayo. Bye for now.